Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
We're grateful you've chosen to join us today. Tell us, which part of the world are you watching from? Big city? Small town? Country? We'd love to know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Man with Two Faces. Barrett Donovan drove his sleek German sedan through the winding roads of Oak Ridge, a wealthy neighborhood nestled in the hills overlooking the city. The radio played softly as wet autumn leaves clung to the windshield. At 45, Barrett had mastered the art of patience, a quality that had served him well in both his personal and professional life. To the world, Barrett was a digital security consultant with a modest demeanor who married into the prestigious Landry family 15 years ago. To his clients, mostly high-net-worth individuals and select corporations, he was the invisible guardian who protected their digital fortunes and secrets. Few knew that behind his unassuming exterior lay a tactical mind that had prevented countless cyber heists and corporate espionage attempts. Today was Thanksgiving, and Barrett's jaw clenched involuntarily as he thought about spending another holiday with the Landrys. His in-laws had never accepted him as worthy of their daughter Vivian, despite his success. To them, he would always be the scholarship kid who lucked his way into their social circle. Almost there, he mumbled to himself, checking his watch. The gold timepiece had been his father's, a hard-working electrician who died when Barrett was 19, leaving him to fend for himself through college. The watch was a reminder of where he came from and the promises he'd made to never let anyone look down on him again. His phone rang, displaying his assistant's name, Lena. "Everything in order?" Barrett asked after answering. "Yes, Mr. Donovan. Mr. Wright is standing by. All files have been prepared and verified, and the offshore accounts untraceable as requested. The judge signed the orders 20 minutes ago." Barrett allowed himself a slight smile. "Perfect timing. I'll be in touch after dinner." He ended the call as he pulled into the circular driveway of the Landry mansion. The three-story colonial stood as a monument to old money and privilege. Barrett had never felt comfortable here, even after all these years. As he approached the door, he caught his reflection in one of the decorative windows. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his tailored suit revealed nothing of his intentions. He straightened his tie, put on his most convincing smile, and rang the doorbell. Theodore Ted Landry opened the door, martini in hand. At 70, he still stood tall, his silver hair immaculately styled, his eyes cold and calculating. "Barrett, you're late," he said without offering a handshake. Traffic was heavier than expected. "Happy Thanksgiving, Ted." Barrett stepped inside, immediately assaulted by the cacophony of voices and the smell of roasting turkey. The Landry extended family was already gathered in the living room. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends, all dressed in their holiday best, all belonging to the same exclusive social circles. He spotted Vivian immediately. At 42, she remained stunning, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves, her green eyes sharp and attentive as she laughed at something her cousin had said. She wore an emerald dress that Barrett had never seen before, though he'd certainly paid for it. When she noticed him, her smile faltered momentarily before recomposing itself. She excused herself and approached him with a glass of white wine in hand. "You made it," she said, giving him a perfunctory kiss on the cheek that reeked of performance. "Wouldn't miss it." Barrett returned the smile, matching her pretense. As he followed Vivian further into the house, he noticed a familiar face that shouldn't have been there. Nolan Pierce, a family friend who worked with Ted at the investment firm. Nolan, in his late 30s with the physique of someone who spent more time in the gym than the office, caught Barrett's eye and nodded with faux friendliness. Barrett nodded back, his face betraying nothing of what he knew. The text messages, the hotel receipts, the afternoon meetings that his wife had been having with Nolan for the past 11 months. The beautiful irony was that it had been Nolan himself who had hired Barrett's firm for cybersecurity services 3 years ago, giving Barrett backdoor access to the very devices that would later document their affair. Drink. Margot Landry, Vivian's mother, appeared beside him with a glass of scotch. Unlike her husband, Margot maintained a veneer of politeness toward Barrett, though her eyes always held the same judgment. "Thank you, Margot." He accepted the drink, knowing it would be his last indulgence of the evening. He needed his wits about him tonight. As they gathered around the massive dining table, Barrett noticed the careful arrangement of place cards. His was conspicuously absent from a main table. Vivian touched his arm. "Barrett, we're a bit crowded this year. Would you mind terribly sitting at the side table with the children? Just for dinner." Barrett looked at the small table set up in the corner where his nieces and nephews, all under 12, were already seated. "Of course," he said smoothly, though he felt his blood pressure rise. "Whatever makes things easier." Ted chuckled from the head of the main table. "Vivian, tell your husband what you really think." Vivian's cheeks colored slightly, but her eyes hardened. "He belongs with the other children," she told her smirking parents. The table erupted in poorly disguised laughter. Barrett felt all eyes on him as he stood there, the outsider who had never been accepted. His father-in-law raised his glass. "At least he's getting fed." More laughter followed as Barrett silently took his seat at the children's table. He stared at his plate, burning with shame that was quickly calcifying into cold resolve. The children glanced at him curiously, but soon returned to their own conversations. Barrett checked his watch again. 5 minutes to showtime. Chapter 2. The Call. The Thanksgiving meal progressed with the usual Landry family pageantry. Speeches about gratitude that rang hollow, discussions of vacations to exotic locations, and not-so-subtle inquiries about everyone's financial successes over the past year. Barrett sat quietly at the children's table, occasionally engaging with his young tablemates about video games and school projects. From his position, he could see Vivian and Nolan exchanging glances when they thought no one was looking. Ted dominated the conversation at the main table, pontificating about his latest business triumph, while Margot supervised the staff serving the meal with eagle-eyed precision. "Uncle Barrett, why are you sitting with us?" asked Penny, Ted's 10-year-old granddaughter from his son's marriage. "Sometimes adults need to remember what it's like to be a kid," Barrett replied with a genuine smile. Despite everything, he'd always liked children. Their honesty and lack of pretense was refreshing. "Is that why Aunt Vivian said you belong with us?" Penny persisted, her innocent question cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Barrett's response was interrupted by the sudden, loud ringing of his phone. The custom ringtone echoed through the dining room, causing conversation at the main table to halt. Barrett made no move to silence it. "Barrett," Vivian hissed from across the room. "Your phone." Barrett slowly reached into his pocket and extracted his phone, making a show of checking the caller ID. "I'm sorry, but I need to take this," he said, standing up. "It's my lawyer." A tense silence fell over the room. Barrett tapped the speaker button and set the phone on the table. "Calvin, you're on speaker. What's the news?" Barrett's voice was calm and measured. "Sir, the judge just signed off." Calvin Wright's voice came through clearly. "The assets are frozen. All of them." You could hear a pin drop in the Landry dining room. Barrett looked directly at Ted, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I'm sorry to hear about the timing." Barrett continued for the benefit of the entire room. "But can you confirm exactly which assets we're talking about?" "Yes, sir. Per your instructions, we've secured judicial freezes on all Landry family accounts connected to Evergreen Partners, including the offshore holdings in Cayman and Singapore. Also, as directed, we've filed the RICO predicates against Theodore Landry and Nolan Pierce." Barrett watched as Ted's hand clutched his chest. Nolan had gone deathly pale. "The forensic accountants finished their preliminary review?" Barrett asked, maintaining his composure. "Yes, sir. Their findings supported everything you provided. The judge was particularly interested in the pattern of fraudulent investments and the misuse of client funds. The FBI has been notified as required by statute." Vivian stood up so quickly her chair crashed to the floor behind her. "Barrett, what is the meaning of this?" Her voice shook with rage and panic. Barrett calmly picked up his phone. "Calvin, I'll call you back. It seems I need to explain some things to my family." He ended the call and pocketed his phone. "Not family," he corrected himself, looking at the stunned faces around the table. "In-laws. And soon, not even that." Ted found his voice first. "You have no idea what you're doing, boy. No idea who you're messing with. Barrett smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Actually, Ted, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I've known for years. Did you really think I wouldn't discover what Evergreen Partners was really doing with client investments? That I wouldn't notice when my own father-in-law was running a glorified Ponzi scheme? He turned to Nolan, whose hand was now intertwined with Vivian's under the table. And Nolan, after you hired my firm, did you never wonder whether I might have access to all your communications? Every text, every email, every hotel reservation. The children were being quietly ushered out of the room by one of the aunts, their eyes wide with confusion and alarm. Margot's voice cut through the tension. This is ridiculous. Ted, call Harlan, she said, referring to the family's longtime attorney. Barrett laughed, a genuine sound devoid of humor. Harlan Du Bois resigned as your counsel this morning. Apparently, he doesn't want to be associated with what's coming. Smart man. He walked slowly around the table, stopping behind Ted's chair. 15 years, Ted. 15 years of subtle digs, of being treated like an outsider, of being reminded that I wasn't good enough for your daughter. And all that time, you were stealing from your clients, building your reputation on fraud. Barrett leaned down, his mouth close to Ted's ear. I didn't just freeze your assets. I own them now. Chapter 3, The Unraveling. The Landry Thanksgiving dinner had devolved into chaos. Relatives hurriedly made excuses to leave, grabbing coats and car keys as they fled what was quickly becoming a crime scene. Within 30 minutes, only the core players remained: Barrett, Vivian, Ted, Margot, and Nolan. They had moved to Ted's study, a wood-paneled room with leather-bound books and hunting trophies that Ted had never actually hunted. The old man sat behind his desk, his earlier bravado replaced by calculated desperation. Whatever you think you know, you're mistaken, Ted said, trying to regain control of the situation. My attorneys will have this cleared up by morning. Barrett leaned against the bookshelf, utterly relaxed. Your attorneys can't help you, Ted. I've been building this case for years, documenting every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated investment. Did you know that 3 of your biggest clients are actually shell companies I control? You've been stealing from me, technically speaking. Vivian paced the room, her perfect composure shattered. This is insane, Barrett. If this is about us, about Nolan and me. It's not, Barrett interrupted. Your affair is just a symptom of a much larger disease in this family. A disease called entitlement. He pulled out his phone and brought up a document. This is interesting reading, Vivian. Your prenuptial agreement. The one you and your father thought was ironclad. The one that stipulated that in case of infidelity on your part, you forfeit all claims to marital assets and family trust disbursements. Vivian stopped pacing. That's not possible. Daddy had that agreement written by the best. By Harlan, yes. The same Harlan who overlooked a crucial detail when Ted restructured the family trusts in 2019. A restructuring that, incidentally, made the trust assets vulnerable to civil asset forfeiture if the trustee, that's you, Ted, was engaged in ongoing criminal activity. Nolan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. This is blackmail. Barrett shook his head. No, Nolan. This is justice. This is consequences. He walked to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn, now dark in the November evening. For years, I've watched this family operate as if rules don't apply to them. Ted manipulates markets and defrauds clients. Margot uses charity events to launder money and reputation. Vivian marries me for convenience while maintaining her real relationships on the side. He turned back to face them. And me? I was just the useful idiot. The tech guy who legitimized your operations, who provided digital security while you committed digital crimes. Margot, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. You think you've won? You have no idea how deep our connections go. One phone call and what? Barrett cut her off. Your political friends won't take your calls anymore, Margot. Not after the documents I sent to the FBI this morning detailing the kickbacks and illegal campaign contributions. As we speak, agents are executing search warrants at Evergreen's offices and your vacation homes. Your connections are scrambling to distance themselves from you. Ted's face had turned an alarming shade of gray. You'll destroy everything. Years of work, our reputation. Your reputation was a lie, Barrett said firmly, built on fraud and maintained through intimidation. And as for destroying everything, he paused, looking directly at Vivian. That process began 11 months ago when your daughter decided our marriage vows were optional. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, Barrett couldn't tell anymore. Barry, please. We can work this out. I made a mistake. Don't call me Barry, he said coldly. That name was for someone who loved you. Someone who doesn't exist anymore. The sound of car doors slamming outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see several black SUVs pulling into the driveway, men in suits emerging with determined expressions. Right on time, Barrett murmured. You called the FBI to our Thanksgiving dinner? Margot asked incredulously. Barrett smiled. I didn't have to. Once a judge issues certain types of orders, things happen automatically. The system works when someone makes it work. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'll see myself out the back way. I have a feeling you'll be busy for a while. Barrett, Ted called out, his voice suddenly old and afraid. What do you want? There must be something we can offer. Barrett considered the question seriously. What do I want? I want the last 15 years of my life back. I want the love I thought I had with Vivian to have been real. I want to not have been the joke of this family. He shook his head. But since none of that is possible, I'll settle for watching everything you value disappear. Just like you made me disappear to the children's table today. As Barrett slipped out the back door of a Landry mansion, he heard the front doorbell ring. The night air was cold and crisp, and for the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe freely. His phone buzzed with a text from Calvin Wright. Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2. Barrett typed back a single word. Yes. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Barrett sat in Calvin Wright's office overlooking downtown. Snow fell lightly outside, dusting the city in white, but inside the atmosphere was warm and charged with purpose. Calvin, a shrewd attorney in his 50s with a reputation for both brilliance and discretion, reviewed documents on his tablet while Barrett gazed at the city below. The Landry Empire is collapsing faster than even I anticipated, Calvin remarked, setting down his tablet. Ted's bail was set at $5 million, which he can't access due to the asset freeze. He spent the last week in county lockup while his new attorney scrambled. Barrett nodded, feeling neither joy nor remorse, only a calm sense of justice being served. And Evergreen Partners? In receivership, the SEC has brought formal charges against both Ted and Nolan. Most clients are fleeing, and those who've lost significant amounts are filing civil suits. The firm will not survive this quarter. Barrett turned from the window. And my wife. Calvin's expression softened slightly. Vivian has filed a counter-petition challenging your divorce filing. She's claiming coercion and emotional distress. A bitter laugh escaped Barrett's lips. Of course she is. Has she moved out of the house? No. As you predicted, she's claiming primary residence rights until the divorce is settled. Barrett had expected this. The lake house he had purchased 5 years ago, the one property he'd intentionally kept solely in his name, had become his sanctuary since Thanksgiving. The modern glass and timber structure on the shore of Lake Gardner was where he now plotted the next phases of his plan. Any word from Nolan? Barrett asked. Calvin shuffled through some papers. He's distancing himself from both the Landrys and Vivian. His attorney has reached out about a possible cooperation agreement with prosecutors. Rats from a sinking ship, Barrett murmured. And the evidence package I prepared, delivered to the SEC, FBI, and the district attorney's office, as instructed. Your documentation was thorough. Barrett smiled faintly. 15 years of meticulous record-keeping. You could say I played the long game. Calvin leaned back in his chair, studying Barrett with newfound respect. Most men, upon discovering their wife's infidelity, act rashly. You waited, gathered evidence, and struck strategically. The affair was just confirmation of what I already suspected, that I was never really part of that family, just a useful accessory. Barrett stood and walked to the credenza where Calvin kept a decanter of whiskey. He poured 2 fingers into a crystal glass, but didn't drink immediately. I realized something important the day after Thanksgiving, Barrett continued. This isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring that people who think they're above consequences face them completely. Calvin accepted a glass of whiskey. Speaking of consequences, Margot Landry has been calling my office 3 times a day. What does she want? To arrange a meeting with you. She's being quite insistent. Barrett considered this. Margot had always been the strategic mind behind the Landry family's social maneuvering. If she wanted to meet, she had an angle. Set it up, Barrett decided. Neutral ground, public place. Tomorrow, if possible. Calvin made note. Now about phase 2. The transfer of the Aspen property is complete. The shell company now legally owns the vacation home. And as per your instructions, eviction notices have been prepared for the property manager and staff. Barrett nodded, satisfaction warming him more than the whiskey could. The Aspen Ski Lodge had been Ted and Margot's pride and joy, the gathering place for their elite social circle during the winter holidays. Now it belonged to Barrett through a complex series of legal maneuvers that even the Landry's new attorneys couldn't unravel. What about the foundation? Barrett asked. Calvin pulled up another document. The Landry Family Foundation has been issued a freeze order pending investigation. Their annual Christmas Gala has been canceled, and several board members have resigned. The Christmas Gala, the social event of the season where the Landrys showcase their philanthropy while secretly using the foundation to shield assets and minimize taxes. Barrett had attended 14 such galas, always feeling like an outsider, even while writing large checks to causes he actually cared about. And Vivian's personal accounts? Frozen, as you requested. Her credit cards were declined at Bergdorf's yesterday. Calvin allowed himself a small smile. According to my sources, it caused quite a scene. Barrett felt a hollow satisfaction at the image. Vivian's carefully cultivated social image was disintegrating, just as his heart had when he'd first discovered her betrayal. Have the divorce papers been amended as we discussed? Barrett asked. Calvin nodded. Yes. The new terms offer her a one-time settlement of $200,000, contingent upon her immediate vacation of all properties and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. She won't accept, Barrett predicted. No, she won't, Calvin agreed. But it establishes our position for when this goes before a judge. Barrett finally took a sip of his whiskey, letting the smoky liquid linger on his tongue. What about the children? Calvin looked confused. Your children? You don't have. No, Ted's grandchildren, Penny and the others. I want to ensure they have college funds that can't be touched by what's happening. Calvin's expression softened. That's unexpected, given the circumstances. Barrett shrugged. They're innocent in all this. And they were kind to me at the children's table. Calvin made another note. I'll set up blind trust for each of them. The Landrys won't know the source of the funds. Barrett finished his whiskey and set the glass down. Thank you, Calvin. Let me know when Margot confirms for tomorrow. As Barrett left the office and stepped into the snowy afternoon, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was from his surveillance system at the lake house. Someone was at his door. The camera showed Nolan Pierce, looking considerably less polished than the last time Barrett had seen him, standing anxiously on the porch. Barrett smiled coldly. The next phase was beginning even sooner than he'd planned. Chapter 5. The Propositions. Barrett drove to the lake house with deliberate calm, the winter landscape passing by in a blur of white and gray. His mind processed the implications of Nolan's unexpected visit. The man had been Vivian's lover, Ted's protege, and, in many ways, the catalyst for Barrett's revenge plan. As he pulled into the driveway, he could see Nolan's luxury SUV parked haphazardly near the entrance. The man himself was sitting on the front steps, his expensive overcoat inadequate protection against the December cold. His face was haggard, the confident smirk replaced by desperate exhaustion. Barrett parked and approached slowly, maintaining a safe distance. He hadn't survived this long by being careless. You're trespassing, Nolan, Barrett said calmly. Nolan stood quickly, his breath clouding in the cold air. Barrett, please. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Why should I give you anything? Because I have information. Information that could help you. Barrett studied the man before him, once so arrogant, now reduced to begging on his doorstep. It was satisfying, but also suspicious. 5 minutes, Barrett agreed, unlocking the door and gesturing Nolan inside. The lake house interior was minimalist and modern. All clean lines, natural materials, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frozen lake. Barrett had deliberately chosen a style completely different from the Landry mansion's ostentatious opulence. Nolan stood awkwardly in the living room, taking in the space. "Nice place. I didn't invite you here for small talk," Barrett replied coldly. "For minutes now." Nolan nodded, gathering himself. "The feds are building a massive case against Ted. They've offered me a deal if I testify. I'm aware. What you might not be aware of is that Ted has evidence that could implicate you as well. He's claiming you were complicit in some of Evergreen's more questionable dealings." Barrett laughed, genuinely amused. Is that the best he can do? Every service my company provided to Evergreen was legitimate and documented. Ted's desperation is showing. Nolan shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Vivian, she's planning something." Barrett's amusement faded. "Explain." "She approached me last week, wanted my help to access some of your secure servers. She thinks you have offshore accounts that weren't included in the financial disclosures for the divorce. This was new information and potentially concerning." Barrett's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. "And did you help her?" Nolan looked down. "I considered it, but I realized something important. She was using me, just like she used you. The difference is you figured it out sooner." Barrett moved to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, deliberately not offering one to Nolan. "Why come to me with this? What do you want?" Nolan took a deep breath. "Protection, and a deal of my own. I can give you everything. Recordings of conversations with Ted about fraudulent investments, details about Vivian's plans, evidence that the Landrys were intentionally hiding assets for years. In exchange for immunity from your pursuit and help with the federal prosecutors. Your influence could ensure I get the best possible deal." Barrett considered the proposition. Nolan could indeed be useful, but trusting him would be foolish. "Your time is up," Barrett said, setting down his glass. "Here's my counteroffer. You'll provide everything you mentioned, every recording, every document, every detail about Vivian's plans to Calvin Wright by tomorrow morning. In return, I won't actively work against your plea deal with the feds." Nolan's face fell. "That's it. That's generous, considering your role in destroying my marriage," Barrett replied coldly. "And Nolan, if I discover you've withheld anything or if the information proves worthless, I'll ensure the federal prosecutors know about the offshore account in Belize where you've been hiding Evergreen commissions." Nolan's shock was evident. "How did you?" "I know everything," Barrett interrupted. "That's a lesson the Landrys and their associates are learning quite painfully. Now, get out of my house." After Nolan left, Barrett secured the property and made several calls, updating his security team about potential intrusion attempts on his servers. Then he prepared for his meeting with Margot the following day. The upscale cafe in the museum district was Margot's choice, neutral territory with enough public visibility to ensure civility. Barrett arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of both entrances and the street outside. Old habits of vigilance died hard. Margot arrived precisely on time, her entrance causing a stir even in diminished circumstances. At 68, she remained striking, silver hair in an elegant chignon, her posture regal despite the obvious strain of recent events. She wore a conservative navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, though Barrett noted the absence of her usual diamond jewelry. She spotted him immediately and approached with measured steps, her expression unreadable. "Barrett," she said, taking the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Margot, you're looking well, considering." A flash of anger crossed her face before the practiced social mask returned. "Circumstances change. People adapt." "Some do," Barrett agreed. "Others face consequences." A server approached, and they both ordered Barrett a black coffee, Margot a pot of Darjeeling tea. When they were alone again, Margot leaned forward. "I'll be direct. This vendetta against my family has gone far enough." "You made your point." Barrett raised an eyebrow. Has Ted sent you as his emissary? Or is this your own initiative? Margot's mouth tightened. Ted is indisposed. His health has suffered since the arrest. My heart bleeds, Barrett replied dryly. Mock if you must, but you've achieved your goal. Ted's reputation is ruined. Evergreen is finished. Our social standing is decimated. Even Vivian is suffering. Barrett studied Margot carefully. In 15 years of marriage to her daughter, he'd never seen Margot Landry plead for anything. What exactly are you proposing, Margot? She straightened, more comfortable now that they were moving to negotiations. A ceasefire. You direct your attack dog lawyers to ease the pressure on the asset freezes. Allow us access to certain accounts for living expenses and legal fees. In return, we facilitate a quick, quiet divorce from Vivian with terms more favorable to her than your insulting current offer. Their drinks arrived, creating a momentary pause. Barrett took a sip of his coffee, contemplating Margot's proposal. Interesting. And what would prevent me from simply continuing my current course of action, which is proceeding quite effectively? Margot's eyes hardened, because despite what you may think, the Landry name still carries weight. Ted may be temporarily compromised, but our extended family has connections you haven't begun to confront. Threats, Margot? I expected more subtlety. Not threats. Reality. She sipped her tea with perfect composure. Additionally, I have something you want. Barrett's interest was piqued despite himself, which is the truth about why Vivian married you. The statement hung in the air between them. Barrett kept his expression neutral, though the question had haunted him since discovering the affair. He'd always assumed it was his financial prospects, or perhaps even genuine feeling at the beginning. I'm listening. Margot set down her teacup. 15 years ago, Vivian was involved with someone Ted disapproved of, a man with the right social credentials, but troubling habits. When things ended badly, there was a situation that needed to be handled discreetly. Your emergence as a prospective husband was convenient timing. Ted saw potential in your technical skills for Evergreen, and I saw an opportunity to solve Vivian's problem. Barrett absorbed this information, the final piece of a puzzle he'd been assembling for years. You arranged our meeting at the charity gala. It wasn't coincidence. Nothing in our circle happens by coincidence, Barrett. Surely you've realized that by now. The coldness that had settled in Barrett's chest since Thanksgiving hardened further. So, my entire marriage was a construction, a solution to a Landry family problem. Margot shrugged elegantly. Initially, perhaps, but 15 years is a long time. Whatever began as arrangement became reality. Until it didn't, Barrett replied. Until Vivian found someone who better matched her true preferences. My daughter has always had diverse appetites. Nolan wasn't the first, merely the most recent. The confirmation of what Barrett had long suspected hit harder than he'd anticipated. He maintained his composure with effort. And you're telling me this now because I want you to understand what you're really fighting. Not a single betrayal, but a fundamental incompatibility that was present from the beginning. This Scorched Earth campaign won't bring you satisfaction, Barrett. Only more emptiness. Barrett considered Margot's words, weighing them against everything he knew and had planned. Finally, he met her gaze directly. Thank you for your honesty, Margot. It's refreshing after years of manipulation and lies. He reached for his coat. But you've misunderstood something fundamental. This isn't just about Vivian or even Ted's financial crimes. Then what is it about? Barrett stood, placing money on the table for both their drinks. It's about consequences. For 15 years, I watched the Landry family operate as if rules were for other people. As if kindness was weakness and loyalty was for fools. He buttoned his coat, his voice remaining conversational, but his eyes cold. You're right that I won't find satisfaction in this campaign, Margot. Satisfaction isn't my goal. Justice is. And justice demands that people who have lived without consequences finally face them, completely and without compromise. Margot's composure cracked slightly. You'll destroy everything, including yourself. Barrett smiled, a genuine expression that didn't reach his eyes. Some things need to be destroyed before something better can be built. Give my regards to Ted when you visit him in custody. As Barrett walked away, his phone buzzed with a message from Calvin. Nolan delivered the materials as promised. You need to see this immediately. Chapter 6, The Revelation. The winter storm that had threatened all day finally broke as Barrett drove back to his office. Snow whipped across the windshield, reducing visibility and matching his turbulent thoughts. Margot's revelation about his marriage had struck deeper than he'd anticipated, confirming his worst suspicions while adding new layers of betrayal. Calvin was waiting in Barrett's office, a serious expression on his face. The leather portfolio on the desk between them contained the materials Nolan had delivered. That bad? Barrett asked, removing his snow-dusted coat. Worse, Calvin replied. These recordings. He gestured to the portfolio. You need to hear them yourself. Barrett settled behind his desk and opened the portfolio. Inside were flash drives, printed documents, and handwritten notes organized with surprising care. He selected the first flash drive and plugged it into his computer. The audio was crystal clear. Nolan had apparently been recording conversations for his own protection for years. The first file featured Ted Landry speaking candidly about Barrett. Donovan is useful but expendable. His security systems give us plausible deniability. If regulators ever get too close, he'll make a convenient scapegoat. Barrett's expression remained impassive as Ted's voice continued, discussing how they had structured certain transactions to appear legitimate while concealing their true nature. The evidence was damning for Ted, but what struck Barrett was the casual contempt with which his father-in-law discussed him, not as family, but as a tool to be used and discarded. The next recording featured Vivian and Nolan, clearly intimate, discussing Barrett. How much longer do we have to maintain this charade? Nolan asked. Vivian's laugh was brittle. Until Daddy decides Barrett's outlived his usefulness. The prenup makes divorce complicated. Besides, he's so wrapped up his work, he barely notices my absences. But you're my woman, Nolan insisted. Everyone knows it except him. That's the beauty of it, Vivian replied. He sees what he wants to see. Meanwhile, we have the best of both worlds. Barrett stopped the recording, his hand steady despite the emotion churning inside him. When was this recorded? Calvin checked the metadata. 8 months ago. There are dozens more spanning the past 3 years. Barrett nodded, processing this information. And the documents? Financial records, mostly. Account numbers for hidden assets that weren't on our radar. But there's something else. Something I'm not sure even Nolan understood the significance of. Calvin handed Barrett a folder containing photocopies of handwritten notes. These appear to be from Ted's personal journal. There are references to something called Operation Lighthouse dating back to when you first met Vivian. Barrett skimmed the pages, his cybersecurity training allowing him to quickly identify patterns in the cryptic notes. These are coded instructions for a long-term intelligence operation. They were monitoring me before I even met Vivian. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Barrett had assumed his marriage was a convenience for the Landrys, perhaps even a genuine match that had soured. But this suggested something more calculated, a deliberate targeting. Why? Calvin asked, voicing the obvious question. Barrett leaned back, mind racing through possibilities. 7 years before I met Vivian, I worked briefly as a contractor for a defense intelligence agency. My security clearance gave me access to certain information that could have been valuable to someone with Ted's connections. He stood and paced the office, pieces falling into place. The Landry family didn't just use me for Evergreen. They targeted me specifically because of my background. Vivian's job wasn't just to marry me. It was to monitor me. Calvin looked stunned. You're suggesting industrial espionage? Corporate spying? Or worse? Barrett's voice had hardened. Some of my projects had national security implications. If Ted was selling information gleaned from my work to foreign interests, he trailed off, the full implications too disturbing to voice aloud. While Barrett had moved into the private sector years ago, the knowledge and access he'd once had would have been valuable to many parties. We need to inform the federal authorities, Calvin suggested. Barrett shook his head. Not yet. This changes everything about my approach. The Landrys aren't just fraudsters and social climbers. they're potentially something far more dangerous. He returned to his desk and pulled up a secure email. I need to contact some former colleagues, people who operate in spheres where this kind of activity is taken very seriously. Calvin looked concerned. Barrett, I understand your anger, but if we're talking about potential national security issues, we need to follow proper channels. Barrett's smile was cold. That's exactly what I intend to do. But first, I need to secure myself against the inevitable counterattack. The Landrys won't go down without a fight, especially with these kind of stakes. He typed rapidly, sending encrypted messages to contacts he hadn't spoken with in years. Calvin, I need you to do 3 things. First, increase security at all properties and offices immediately. Second, accelerate the divorce proceedings. I want Vivian legally separated from me as soon as possible. Third, prepare documentation of everything we've discovered for delivery to specific federal agencies. Calvin nodded, already making notes. And what will you be doing? Barrett's expression was grim but determined. Setting a trap. The Landrys think they've been playing me for 15 years. It's time they learned who they're really dealing with. After Calvin left, Barrett sat alone in his office as the storm raged outside. The revelations had transformed his understanding of the past 15 years of his life. What he had believed was a marriage that had simply failed was actually something far more sinister, a long-term operation with him as the unwitting target. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Barrett answered cautiously. Mr. Donovan? A woman's voice, professional and clipped. This is Special Agent Diana Walsh, FBI Counterintelligence Division. We need to speak with you immediately regarding Theodore Landry and certain international connections. Barrett closed his eyes briefly. The game had just changed dramatically. I've been expecting your call, Agent Walsh. I think we have a lot to discuss. Chapter 7, The Counterattack. 4 days after speaking with Agent Walsh, Barrett sat in a secure conference room at the federal building downtown. The windows were covered, electronic devices banned, and a white noise machine hummed in the corner to prevent any possibility of eavesdropping. Present were Agent Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor, 2 other FBI agents, and a representative from the Department of Justice. To summarize what we've confirmed so far, Agent Walsh said, consulting her notes, Theodore Landry has been using Evergreen Partners as a front for selling proprietary information to foreign entities for at least 20 years. Your marriage to Vivian Landry appears to have been orchestrated primarily to gain access to your knowledge and connections from your time as a federal contractor. Barrett nodded, his expression betraying nothing of the ongoing turmoil he felt at having his entire adult life revealed as an elaborate charade. The evidence you've provided, combined with materials we've seized from Evergreen offices and the Landry residences, is compelling, continued Agent Walsh. What remains unclear is your level of awareness and involvement. I was completely unaware until recently, Barrett stated firmly. As my security clearance records will show, I've maintained all required protocols even after leaving government work. My private security firm has never handled classified information. The DOJ representative, a grave man named Adeyemi, leaned forward. Mr. Donovan, while we appreciate your cooperation, you must understand our position. You live with a key figure in this operation for 15 years. The question must be asked, how did you not notice? It was a fair question, one Barrett had been asking himself constantly since the revelation. I trusted my wife, he said simply, and the Landrys were skilled at compartmentalization. Vivian never showed interest in my previous government work, which I interpreted as respect for confidentiality. In retrospect, that lack of curiosity should have been a red flag. Agent Walsh nodded. Our preliminary assessment supports your claim of non-involvement. However, the coming days will be challenging. We're preparing to make additional arrests, including your wife. Barrett absorbed this information. When? Tomorrow morning. We wanted to brief you first because of your unique position in this case, both a potential victim and a key witness. Barrett considered the implications. The Landrys must suspect that their time is running out. They won't go quietly. We've been monitoring all known associates, one of the other agents assured him. Security has been increased around federal witnesses, and He was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Another agent entered and whispered something to Agent Walsh, whose expression immediately hardened. "Mr. Donovan, were you expecting visitors at your lake house today?" Barrett felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "No, the property should be vacant." Agent Walsh stood quickly. "We've just received an alert from the surveillance team. 2 individuals entered your property approximately 20 minutes ago. One has been identified as Vivian Landry." Barrett was on his feet immediately. The other? Unknown male, not Nolan Pierce or Theodore Landry. Barrett's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "I need to get there now. They could be destroying evidence or setting you up." Agent Walsh finished his thought. "We'll escort you, but you'll remain in our vehicle until we secure the scene." The drive to the lake house was tense, a caravan of unmarked federal vehicles moving swiftly through the snowy landscape. Barrett sat in the back of Agent Walsh's SUV, thoughts churning. What was Vivian doing? The lake house contained nothing incriminating against him, but it did hold his personal server with backups of evidence against the Landrys. As they approached the property, Agent Walsh received updates through her earpiece. Subjects are still inside. No movement detected for the past 10 minutes. The federal agents deployed with practiced efficiency, surrounding the house while Barrett remained in the vehicle as instructed. Through the tinted windows, he watched the scene unfold like a surreal movie. Agents with weapons drawn approaching his sanctuary, the place he'd retreated to when his world began unraveling. Minutes stretched like hours until Agent Walsh returned to the SUV, her expression grave. "Mr. Donovan, we need you to come with us. There's a situation inside." Barrett followed her through the snow, heart pounding despite his outward calm. The front door stood open, agents moving purposefully through his home. They led him to the study where his home server was kept. The scene inside made him stop cold. Vivian lay on the floor, unmoving, a pool of blood spreading beneath her head. Next to her was a man Barrett had never seen before, also motionless, a gun near his outstretched hand. "Are they?" Barrett couldn't finish the question. "Both deceased," Agent Walsh confirmed quietly. "Initial assessment suggests murder-suicide, but we'll need to process the scene fully." Barrett stared at his wife's body, a storm of conflicting emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Despite everything she'd done, seeing Vivian like this, her blonde hair stained red, her eyes forever closed, struck him with unexpected force. "The server appears to have been tampered with," another agent reported, indicating the open cabinet where Barrett's equipment was housed. "Looks like they were attempting to extract or destroy data." Barrett approached carefully, staying clear of the bodies as directed by the agents. A quick examination confirmed his fears. "They've removed the primary drive array. Without it, most of my backups are inaccessible." Agent Walsh looked sharply at him. "How damaging is this to our case?" Barrett considered the technical implications. "Not catastrophic. I maintained off-site backups that contained most of the same information. But this was definitely a cleanup operation." "And it went wrong," Agent Walsh observed, looking at the bodies. Barrett nodded slowly. "Or it went exactly as someone planned." The implication hung in the air. Was this truly a botched evidence destruction attempt that ended in violence? Or something more sinister, a way to eliminate Vivian as a potential witness while simultaneously compromising evidence and framing Barrett? "I need to make a call," Barrett said, his mind already working on contingencies. "My attorney needs to know about this immediately." Agent Walsh nodded. "Use my phone. We'll need yours as evidence since it connects to this network." As Barrett stepped outside to make the call, the winter sun was setting over the frozen lake, casting long shadows across the snow. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the chaos inside and the turmoil in his mind. Calvin answered on the first ring. "Barrett, where are you? I've been trying to reach you." "There's been an incident at the lake house," Barrett said, keeping his voice steady. "Vivian is dead. Apparent murder-suicide with an unknown accomplice." A shocked silence, then, "My God, are you all right?" "Physically, yes. But this complicates everything. They were after my server. the one containing backup evidence against the Landrys. Calvin's lawyer mind immediately grasped the implications. This has Ted's fingerprints all over it. A desperate move to silence Vivian and compromise evidence in one stroke. My thoughts exactly, but we need to move quickly. Activate Protocol Omega immediately. Protocol Omega was the contingency plan they had developed for worst-case scenarios, a comprehensive legal and digital response designed to protect Barrett and preserve evidence in the event of a direct attack. Understood. What about the Miami situation? Barrett had almost forgotten about the other operation they had in motion, tracking a suspected Landry associate who had been moving assets through Florida. Maintain surveillance, but take no action. Everything focuses on this now. As Barrett ended the call and turned back toward the house, he saw Agent Walsh watching him with an unreadable expression. "Protocol Omega?" she asked. Barrett met her gaze steadily. "Legal contingencies, my attorney, and I prepared in case the Landrys took desperate measures. Which, as we can see, they have." Agent Walsh nodded slowly. "Mr. Donovan, I've worked counterintelligence for 16 years. In my experience, when operations of this magnitude start to collapse, they rarely end cleanly. Meaning Vivian won't be the last casualty. Ted Landry is cornered, and cornered animals are at their most dangerous." Barrett looked back at his lake house, now transformed into a crime scene. "I'm aware of the risks, Agent Walsh, but I've been playing this game longer than Ted realizes. He taught me an important lesson at that Thanksgiving table. That family means nothing to people like him when power and self-preservation are at stake." "And what lesson are you planning to teach in return?" she asked carefully. Barrett's expression hardened. "That actions have consequences. No matter who you are, no matter how untouchable you think you are, the bill always comes due." As the agents continued processing the scene, Barrett stood in the cold, watching the last light fade from the sky. Vivian was gone, the woman he had once loved, then hated, and now would never fully understand. But her death changed nothing about his resolve. If anything, it strengthened it. The endgame had begun. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The news of Vivian Landry's death broke the next morning, sending shockwaves through the city's elite circles. The official statement was sparse on details, noting only that authorities were investigating a violent incident at a private residence involving Mrs. Landry and an unidentified male. Barrett, sequestered in a secure hotel under FBI protection, watched the media coverage with detached interest. The reporters knew nothing of the true complexities at play, focusing instead on Vivian's social standing and the earlier scandals surrounding Evergreen Partners. Some speculated about Barrett's whereabouts, painting him alternately as a grieving husband or a calculated mastermind. Agent Walsh entered his suite, bringing coffee and updates. "Theodore Landry has been transferred to a higher security facility after we intercepted communications suggesting an escape attempt." Barrett accepted the coffee, but showed no surprise at the news. "And Margot, under house arrest, pending formal charges. We've frozen all additional accounts you identified." Agent Walsh sat across from him, studying his composed demeanor. "The man found with Vivian has been identified as Xavier Dimitri, a former military contractor with ties to several foreign intelligence services." "A cleaner," Barrett murmured. "Someone brought in to eliminate loose ends." "That's our assessment as well. The question is why Dimitri turned on Vivian." Barrett considered the possibilities. Two scenarios. Either Vivian wasn't supposed to be eliminated, but something went wrong, or Dimitri was ordered to eliminate her all along, Agent Walsh finished, making it look like a murder-suicide that could potentially be blamed on you. Barrett nodded grimly, Ted cutting his losses. Vivian knew too much, and as a potential witness against her father, she became a liability. The realization that Ted Landry would sacrifice his own daughter to protect himself should have shocked Barrett. But after everything he'd learned, it merely confirmed his understanding of the man's character. "There's something else," Agent Walsh said, her tone shifting slightly. "We've been going through the materials recovered from the Landry estate. There's evidence suggesting that Nolan Pierce was more deeply involved than he admitted to you." Barrett raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" It appears he was the original liaison between Evergreen and certain foreign interests. His relationship with Vivian may have been part of a longer game, keeping tabs on both you and Ted. The layers of betrayal continued to unfold, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Barrett had assumed Nolan was merely Ted's lackey and Vivian's lover, but this suggested something far more calculated. Where is Pierce now? That's the problem, Agent Walsh admitted. He missed his scheduled check-in with his handler yesterday. We have an alert out, but so far, nothing. Barrett stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city below, a city where he had built a life that turned out to be constructed on lies. He's running, Barrett said with certainty. Probably has emergency funds and identity documents prepared. It's what I would have done in his position. Agent Walsh watched him carefully. You speak as if you understand his thinking. I've spent 15 years securing digital assets for wealthy clients, Agent Walsh. I understand how people hide things they don't want found. He turned back to face her. But I'm better at finding them than most people are at hiding them. Barrett moved to the hotel room's desk where a secure laptop provided by the FBI sat waiting. With your permission, I'd like to try something. Agent Walsh hesitated only briefly before nodding. Proceed, but I need to monitor all activities. Barrett's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing systems through channels that would have been impossible for most people. 3 years ago, Nolan asked my firm to secure his personal devices after a supposed hacking attempt. During that process, I created a backdoor, standard procedure for high-risk clients who might need emergency assistance. That's somewhat ethically questionable, Agent Walsh noted, though without real censure. Barrett's mouth quirked. In retrospect, it was one of my better decisions. If Nolan is still using any of those devices. After several minutes of intense concentration, Barrett straightened. Got him. He's accessed his emergency email account twice in the past 12 hours. Based on the IP addresses. He paused, analyzing the data. He's heading south, probably aiming for Mexico. Agent Walsh was already on her phone, relaying the information to her team. When she finished, she gave Barrett an appraising look. You could have had a successful career in our world, Mr. Donovan. I chose a different path, Barrett replied simply. And now? When this is over, she asked. Barrett hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. His focus had been so completely on unraveling the Landry conspiracy and pursuing justice that he'd given little thought to what came after. One battle at a time, Agent Walsh. Ted Landry is still fighting, even from custody. Until he's fully neutralized, nothing is over. As if summoned by his words, Barrett's secure phone rang. Calvin Wright calling with news. Barrett, we have a situation. The judge overseeing Ted's case has recused himself suddenly. The replacement is Judge Harmon Carlton. Barrett's expression darkened. Carlton was at the Landry's Christmas gala last year. He and Ted share membership at the same exclusive club. Exactly. This is delay tactic written all over it. The new judge will need time to review the case. And meanwhile, Ted's team is filing motions to reconsider bail. Barrett had anticipated this move. The Landry influence extended into judicial circles, and Ted would exploit every connection available. Activate the Carlton file, Barrett instructed, referring to one of many dossiers he had prepared on Landry Associates. Send it to Agent Walsh's team anonymously. After ending the call, Barrett found Agent Walsh watching him with intense curiosity. Don't want to know what's in the Carlton file. Nothing illegal, Barrett assured her. Just documented connections between Carlton and the Landrys that would constitute a clear conflict of interest. Material that should have prompted the judge to recuse himself before accepting the case. Agent Walsh shook her head slightly. You really did prepare for every contingency. 15 years married to a Landry taught me to always plan 3 moves ahead. Barrett checked his watch. We should prepare for the next phase. Ted will be getting desperate, and Margot is still free enough to act as his proxy. What do you anticipate? Barrett considered the question seriously. A direct appeal, probably for Margot, offering some kind of deal, evidence against bigger fish in exchange for leniency. When that fails, a public character assassination against me. And if all else fails, he paused. A more permanent solution to the Barrett-Donovan problem. Agent Walsh's expression hardened. We'll increase your security detail. Barrett shook his head. That won't be necessary. In fact, I think it's time we allowed some controlled information to leak regarding my whereabouts. You want to draw them out? Agent Walsh realized. I want to end this, Barrett corrected. And sometimes, to catch a predator, you need to present the right bait. Agent Walsh looked skeptical. We can't authorize using you as bait in an active federal investigation. Barrett smiled thinly. Who said anything about authorization? I'm simply a private citizen who might be careless enough to be seen at his office tomorrow morning. Before Agent Walsh could object further, Barrett's secure phone rang again, this time with a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. Barrett? It's Penny. Penny Landry. The young voice of Ted's granddaughter was shaking. I'm scared. They said you might be able to help us. Barrett's expression changed instantly, his tactical calculations giving way to genuine concern. Penny? What's happened? Where are you? At Grandma Margot's house. But people came and took her away, and now there's no one here except the housekeeper, and she's crying and won't tell us what's going on. Us? Who's with you, Penny? My brother Miles and our cousins. We were supposed to have a sleepover, but now everyone's gone, and we don't know what to do. Barrett met Agent Walsh's eyes, silently communicating the situation. She was already making calls, presumably to determine if Margot's arrest had been executed without proper provisions for the children. Penny, listen to me carefully. Everything's going to be okay. I want you to stay exactly where you are. Don't answer the door for anyone. I'm coming to get you. After assuring Penny again and ending the call, Barrett turned to Agent Walsh. I need to go. Now. We'll send a child services team. No, Barrett interrupted firmly. Those children know me. They're scared and confused. I'm not going to let them be handed off to strangers. Agent Walsh appeared torn between protocol and human compassion. This could be a trap. It could be, Barrett acknowledged. But if it is, it's an incredibly elaborate one, using a terrified child as bait. Are you willing to take that chance? The decision was made quickly after that. With a small team of agents for security, Barrett headed to Margot's townhouse. As they drove through the darkening city, Barrett reflected on the unexpected turn of events. He had been prepared to face down Ted and Margot's final desperate moves, but he hadn't anticipated being called to protect their grandchildren. The Landry children had always been innocent bystanders in this war. Barrett had ensured their college funds were protected, but he'd given little thought to their immediate well-being in the chaos of arrests and investigations. When they arrived at the townhouse, Barrett insisted on approaching alone, with agents covering from a distance. He rang the bell and waited, alert for any sign of danger. The door opened to reveal Penny's tear-streaked face. At 10 years old, she was old enough to sense the gravity of the situation, but too young to understand it. "Uncle Barrett," she cried, throwing her arms around him in relief. "You came." Barrett hugged her gently, scanning the foyer behind her for threats. "I promised I would. Where are the others?" Penny led him to the kitchen where 3 other children, ranging from 7 to 12, sat huddled together at the table. The housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Perez who had worked for the Landrys for decades, stood nearby, looking lost and frightened. "Señor Donovan," she exclaimed when she saw him. "Gracias a Dios." I did not know who to call. The police, they took Mrs. Landry, but said nothing about the children. Barrett assured the children and Mrs. Perez that everything would be all right, though he knew the road ahead would be challenging for all of them. As he organized their temporary care with the agents and child welfare specialists who arrived shortly after, Barrett felt a strange sense of closure. In the midst of all the betrayal and deception, these children, the youngest members of the Landry dynasty, had turned to him in their moment of need. Not to their grandfather's powerful friends or their parents' social circle, but to the man who had once been banished to the children's table at Thanksgiving. It was a small victory, but perhaps the most meaningful one of all. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. 6 months after the events at the lake house, Barrett stood at the railing of his penthouse balcony, watching the summer sunset paint the city skyline in gold and amber. The warm evening breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic and life below. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary circumstances that had reshaped Barrett's existence. Beautiful view, remarked Calvin Wright, joining him with 2 glasses of scotch. Worth every penny of that obscene price you paid. Barrett accepted the offered drink with a small smile. I consider it an investment in my future. The penthouse had been one of his first purchases after the final legal settlements. Located in a recently completed tower downtown, it represented a clean break from his past. No connections to the Landrys, no memories of Vivian, just floor-to-ceiling windows and endless possibilities. Speaking of investments, Calvin continued, the Barrett Donovan Security Group's IPO filing has the financial press in a frenzy. Early valuations are exceeding even our optimistic projections. Barrett nodded, unsurprised. The publicity surrounding the Landry case had inadvertently showcased his cybersecurity expertise to the world. What had once been a boutique security firm serving select clients had transformed into a rapidly expanding enterprise with government contracts and international reach. And the foundation? Barrett asked. The Lighthouse Foundation's first round of scholarships will be announced next week. 20 students from disadvantaged backgrounds receiving full rides to study cybersecurity and digital ethics. Barrett felt genuine satisfaction at this news. The foundation, named with deliberate irony after Ted's covert operation against him, had become his most personally meaningful project. Using a significant portion of the assets recovered from the Landrys, he had established a program specifically designed to help young people who, like him years ago, had talent and drive but lacked financial resources and connections. Any word from Agent Walsh? Calvin asked after a comfortable silence. She's been reassigned to a task force investigating similar operations. Apparently, the Landry case opened up several new avenues of inquiry into foreign influence networks. The federal investigation had expanded far beyond Ted Landry and Evergreen Partners, uncovering connections to international business figures and even political campaigns. Ted himself had eventually agreed to a cooperation deal, though his information had proven less valuable than prosecutors hoped. Too many of his contacts had gone aground once news of his arrest broke. In Ted's sentencing, Calvin prompted. 22 years, Barrett replied. Given his age, essentially a life sentence. Neither man commented on the justice of this outcome. Ted Landry had orchestrated not only financial crimes, but operations that compromised national security and ultimately led to his own daughter's death. The court had shown little mercy. Margot's appeal was denied, Calvin added. She'll serve the full 7 years, though I suspect she'll find ways to maintain her comforts even in federal prison. Barrett took a sip of his scotch, thinking of his former mother-in-law. Margot had been charged as an accessory, her role in the operations less direct than Ted's, but still significant. True to her nature, she had negotiated the best possible terms for herself, sacrificing old allies without hesitation. And Nolan Pierce remains in the wind. Calvin concluded their update. Though there are rumors of a sighting in Argentina last month, Barrett had mixed feelings about Nolan's escape. On one hand, justice demanded he face consequences for his role in the Landry operations and his affair with Vivian. On the other hand, Nolan had provided critical evidence that helped bring down Ted. Perhaps living in perpetual fear of capture was its own form of punishment. The children are adapting well, Barrett said, changing the subject to something that had unexpectedly become important to him. Penny called yesterday to tell me about her science project. Following the arrests, the Landry grandchildren had been placed with various relatives, none of whom had been directly implicated in Ted and Margot's crimes. Barrett had initially maintained distance, conscious of the complications his presence might create in their lives. But Penny had persistently reached out, and gradually he had become something of a mentor figure to her, and eventually the other children as well. You never expected to become the favorite uncle of the Landry grandchildren, Calvin observed with a hint of amusement. Barrett shook his head. Life takes unexpected turns. They moved inside as the evening air cooled. The penthouse interior was minimalist but warm. Natural materials, clean lines, and carefully chosen art that reflected Barrett's true tastes rather than the ostentatious style Vivian had insisted upon in their shared homes. On his desk sat a small frame containing a handwritten note, a thank you card from Penny for the microscope he had sent for her birthday. It was a reminder that amid all the destruction and injustice he had wrought upon the Landry Empire, something positive had emerged. "Do you ever regret how things unfolded?" Calvin asked, settling into one of the leather armchairs. "Not the justice part, but the collateral damage? Vivian's death, the children's trauma?" Barrett considered the question seriously. He had asked himself the same thing during sleepless nights over the past months. "I regret that it came to this," he finally answered. "I regret that what I thought was love was actually an elaborate deception. I regret that children had to witness the destruction of their family legacy." He paused, looking out at the city lights now twinkling in the dusk. "But I don't regret pursuing the truth, no matter how painful. And I don't regret ensuring that people who believe themselves above consequences finally face them." Calvin nodded thoughtfully. "In your future? Beyond the company and the foundation?" Barrett hadn't shared his latest plans with anyone yet, but Calvin had earned his trust through unwavering support during the darkest days. "I've been approached about consulting on a national cybersecurity initiative. It would mean returning to government work in some capacity, using what I've learned from the private sector to help protect others from operations like the one that targeted me." "You'd be good at that," Calvin observed. "You understand both the technical and human aspects of security breaches." Barrett smiled faintly. "I had excellent teachers in the art of betrayal." As Calvin left later that evening, Barrett remained in his living room, nursing a final glass of scotch and reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From the scholarship kid who married into wealth to the outsider at the Thanksgiving table, to the architect of the Landry dynasty's downfall, each version of himself had led inexorably to this moment. His phone chimed with a message from Penny, a photo of her completed science project with the caption, "First place," followed by a string of excited emojis. Barrett sent back his congratulations, a genuine smile forming as he typed. In the end, his revenge had been complete. Justice served cold and meticulously, just as he had planned since that humiliating moment at the Thanksgiving table. The assets had indeed been frozen, the Landry empire dismantled, and Ted would spend his remaining years in federal prison. But the true victory, Barrett realized, wasn't in the destruction he had wrought, but in what he had built from the ashes. A life entirely his own, defined not by his connection to the Landrys, but by his own choices and values. He raised his glass in a silent toast to the future, one where he would never again allow himself to be seated at someone else's children's table, but would instead be the one who determined who was worthy of a place at his own. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.